Welcome to Three Questions with Motion Point. I'm your host, Dominic Dithurbide, and today I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Adam Asnes, CEO and founder of Lingoport. Lingoport helps companies and organizations internationalize, localize, and test software so it works well in every target language and local format. Adam, how are you doing today?
Good, good. That's a very nice introduction. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, well deserved. For a veteran in the industry, Lingoport's been around, for over 20 years, and it's a pleasure to speak with you today, Adam. It really is.
Thank you. So pleasure as well as mine, and nice to meet you, Dominic. So
thank you, Adam.
Looking forward to this.
Well, let's do it then. Let's dive right in. So we're going to talk about internationalization, of course, and the customer experience. So how would you describe internationalization and its impact to the customer experience?
Well, I'm gonna say, there's the obvious things that people will prefer to interact within software in whatever language is most comfortable for them. And I think that there are some people who get lost on this initially because, let's say, they took a trip to Paris, and as soon as they tried to speak French, people switched to English because they didn't, because they were being accommodating. There's lots of experiences like that. But that's speaking with a U.S. centricity. The fact that people might speak English doesn't mean it's their preference. So, for instance, I work with a lot of people around the world, and it's very easy to notice within their correspondence or screen sharing that even though they speak English really well, they are choosing on their computers and in most of the software they use to work in their native language, the language that they're most comfortable with. So whereas there are markets where you might get away with English as the language, you might not be the preference. And that speaks volumes to the user experience. And then there are parts of the world where you're just not really competing if you're in English, even with technically oriented products, because they can sort of sometimes get away with a little bit more. But there's so much more to internationalization in the user experience than just the language, although that's the most obvious thing. Think of numerical formats here in the US written as 1,00, and many other places as 1.000 as the number 1,000. In some markets, the number grouping is going to be different. So, we have blocks of 3 digits together, others with blocks of 2. So, if you're talking about things like numbers, you really want to have that right in the user's mind, or do they trust your application? There's so many what we call local specific formats, from addresses to even how plurals are handled. I might even bring up plurals again because it's something very non-obvious to the average developer or even marketing individual that pluralization is a big deal in some markets. Gender of objects, all kinds of things come into play. And even for a US company, if their customers are multinational companies, they're going to have internal data that is multinational. And so if you're not parsing an address format right, or a phone number, or any number of things like a currency, it's going to look bad. So I think that, it used to be a little harder to talk companies into the business case of internationalization. It's now a lot easier. You still see applications that have zero internationalization, and we have this whole services division that goes and fixes that. But more often than not, it's that there are internationalization bugs that are just simply sitting around for years and years because nobody is going to take the time to fix them, especially if they can't actually locate them in the code. It's not always obvious. So I joke that, IT issues go to Jira to die, basically a bug tracking system, because, you look at it and you say, well, is this a priority thing? It is if you're in this other country and if you're a localization professional, it's an important bug. It's really a bug, not an issue. But to many others, they may not judge it that way and not want to go on to the sleuthing aspect of why is this date or time in a format that we don't want. You know what I mean? Like finding that is not always obvious. So
yeah, it kind of reminds me of back in the day in high school when we were studying, maybe middle school, we were studying like significant figures, right? And in every language and in every culture and region, there's formatting and ways that are easier for you to recognize and understand that this was made and built for me. And when it doesn't feel that way, not only are you having people focus more on their frontal lobe and making conscientious, like rational thinking, instead of letting it just be, a little bit unnoticed, right? Sometimes you think about the word or the saying like, if nobody says anything, then there's no problem, right? And you rather have a customer experience that feels familiar, where you're not really having to struggle. Is this day in the right format? This is in dollars, but I want to buy, using the euro, and creating that experience where there's parity, right? And you're not really, or what's the call, like, maybe feeling like you're underwhelming or underserving other markets, right?
So let's remember that business case really rules any globalization project, whether it's localizing a website, documentation, or ultimately software. And when I talk about internationalization, I really am in the software domain.
Right.
But it always comes back to the business case and not, way before you get to the technical aspects of it. Like people have to believe in the business case. And what I'm sort of fond of giving as an example is that, a product designer will give a lot of thought into the color blue and the shade of the color blue and the layout of the UI, and they'll prototype that. In most organizations these days, you might have the designer building wireframes in, say, Figma, and really focusing on what is that user experience going to be on. Yet that same organization has nothing to catch an internationalization issue until, like, maybe they find it after localization, so really late in the process.
Yeah.
And use systems that really automate that effort from internationalization to localization to QA, and really establish processes that they actually have already for design, development, QA, and deployment. Like those are really well established capabilities in an organization. And yet, if you look at the business case, back to the business case, one of a company's most significant ways to grow their revenue is to just by making things available in a customer's language. And to, that brings on other things like distributors or, Salesforce, other investments that kind of need the best product possible. Because it doesn't, in the realm of product development costs, it doesn't really cost that much more to do it right for global markets, right? So it's one of the better investments you can make in your product development to back up your global organization and to grow your company. So it always comes back to the business case.
Absolutely. No, and we see that a lot in different types of formats in the translation and localization industry in general. Like, for example, you'll spend hours designing a landing page, and then you translate that website, and you didn't account for the word growth that tends to happen when
Right.
translating from English to
Yeah.
another language. And now there's
Right.
misalignments and broken templates.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's about building applications and landing pages that render an experience that's readily available
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be translated or to be offered into another language. And what happens is, especially here in the US, is you don't really have translation and localization or internationalization as a core competency, and it's really not something that marketers,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
developers tend to be thinking first. They always optimize for their
Right.
flagship
Right.
experience. Most of the time that is in English, and it does trickle down to a big fault and opportunity later on. So that's brilliant. I really like how you articulated that, Adam. And I think it'd be great if we could kind of move into that next question here. It's, what are some of the complexities associated to, you know, internationalization, especially internationalizing software applications? What do you say to that, Adam?
So again, one of the chief complexities is as high level as making sure all the stakeholders understand the business case and
Mm,
the complexity of what's going on, which I'll go into. So, for instance, that starts with both your senior management, kind of trickles into your product management, your localization management. Those should be the banner. They should be leading, carrying the banner
yeah,
for this, because it's their job. But also to impact the developers, the designers, the developers, and the testers, so that you have really like a complete view in the organization. So it's planning, it's product management, it's design, it's development, and QA. It's not just a developer problem.
hmm
Although it's, you know, when it comes to building everything, the developers have to do the right thing. You know, it's just another form of coding quality. But until you have that message of why you need to look deeper, it's the same thing with security. Like, people took security really lightly, and then, you know, people were getting in the newspapers for bad reasons for security
yeah,
breaches, and they had to build security into the process of how they write software. It's the same thing, only instead of the stick being hit with the stick with a security breach, you have you know, sort of the carrot ahead. You know, if you internationalize well, you got a good product. The stick is that you don't want to go back and have to fix stuff. I mean, it's
yeah,
just like no developer wants to do that, right?
yeah,
So that's what I'd say, you know, first. And then in terms of complexity, um, it's really easy to have IoT issues creep into software development. So you mentioned things like string length, you know, that suddenly the words are too broad for, you know, let's say in a product, it's the button. And I'll talk about
yeah,
that in the next question. Like I had this great conversation yesterday with a customer about this. Um, but that's one obvious aspect. But, you know, a lot of times it's as simple as you know, word order. You know, did the
hmm
developer bake in word order? You know, because literally developers are taught to build a message based on various variables. So a simplified example is, I have 5, a quantity, red, a description, apples, a, you know, the thing, with parentheses for the S at the end if there's more than one,
hmm
right? So all of that is learned in programming 101
hmm
to build the string in parts because it's efficient coding. But that doesn't work for localization. So people have to unlearn and think in a different way, because the number format may be different. The descriptor, the red of the apples, might come after the apples, and the pluralization of the apples might be a different thing. And the apples might have a gender, right? So you
yeah,
have to make it so that the translator can be successful and give you a good translation. Otherwise, you get word salad. And again, you it's very cute for many Americans to understand. when they go to a Chinese restaurant and the English translation is kind of funny. I'm
Yeah.
picking on one type of restaurant. It's cute, and you accept it in the Chinese restaurant. That's okay, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't accept it in a bank that's in an
Right.
applications that's managing your money. I mean, there's just no freaking way. You'd be like, what is this? Do I trust this thing? Is this
You're
for
absolutely
real?
right.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, I get that.
yeah,
If I were to surmise that, it's like,
yeah,
well, forget about the complexities that are technical and going back and fixing it.
right.
That's hard enough. The biggest complexity is fundamentally,
Hmm.
thinking and getting the organization to think in a way that's inclusive of, avoiding these pitfalls in the
Right,
future,
right,
which if you get it right at the beginning, will render
right.
very like easy to do, easy to scale internationally, a solution not only for customers in other
Hmm.
languages, but
Hmm.
for your own internal operations to not have to go back and fix things. If you get it, if you
Right,
have it
right,
in your mind to build it in a way that's
right.
internationalized from the beginning, you'll be better off moving forward. So it's almost like a shifting the paradigm, thinking of being very isolated into English only. I'm picking like you were just
Hmm.
isolating the U.S. market, and actually being very practicing diversity and inclusivity and inclusion at the product development level, right? And
Right,
that comes from
right,
the
right.
CEO and it trickles down. That's very interesting. All right, I guess I'll move on to the next one, which is in your experience, and I think that we were getting into this already, right? But how should internationalization be baked into every sprint and release for an efficient and fast rollout of product
Hmm.
development?
Hmm. So I'll give some examples. I'm going to say that yes, it should be baked in because the easiest way to fix an I-10N issue is to fix it when it's created, not when you found it after localization,
Right.
right? Or even in testing. I mean, testing is better than not finding it, but that means going back and fixing. So
Yeah.
like our solutions will either check things as the developer goes along. That's a little bit more intrusive within their development environments. It will automatically check things every time they commit, which is a developer word for save.
Yep.
And furthermore, it will absolutely check automatically during a pull request, which is when a developer submits their work to be included in the product and reviewed by their peers,
Mm.
right? And so they look at those pull request reports and say, oh, there's I-10N issues, I-10N being short for internationalization. And here exactly is where the issue is. So now instead of a sleuthing effort, it's like a quick fix
Yeah.
generally to do something about it. And so you don't build this backlog of issues that nobody wants to deal with later. So that's the first thing. And we have integrated testing stuff and as well on the QA side. There's quite a bit to help testers be able to test without having to speak a target language. Um, and then at the design phase, so like I was talking with a customer during a webinar, I was interviewing her just yesterday, so timely. And she was talking about how she was using one of our products to automatically, with just using machine translation,
Hmm.
work on at the Figma design stage.
Hmm.
So, and what they would do, again, using our stuff, is see in the actual language, what is the longest possible string that's going to be here? And so the
Hmm.
designers, when they create their wireframes, they see it.
Yeah.
It's not like they find out later that in German it's this long, and in French it's only this long. Like they see it right up front, and so they can design around that, which is very powerful. And given how inexpensive a machine translation is now to use
Yeah.
it, you're talking a few dollars per millions of characters, and
Yep.
it's not that hard to do training. And now we have ChatGPT Turbo, which is also good if you're willing to put in the work and open up to using it, which is another question. But I'm not saying that's your final translation, but as a design tool, that's very powerful because you get an immediate feedback, not something, 3 days or 3 weeks later. You get it right away. So that's an example of integrating not just internationalization checking, which we've been doing for years, but this kind of loop of machine translation, or you can use pseudo localization also, but I like the machine translation impact. For the developer to see this is what this will look like.
Yeah.
Also, not just the designer is very powerful because you have developers adding error messages all the time, like the designer didn't think of, or last minute changes. We also have all kinds of string management there as well. So it's I18N, the localization automation, which we do a lot of. It's sometimes as simple as, hey, some group has their own version of a JSON format that they're using to pass to localization. There's no way that the translator can work with that. So we'll transform that for them. So there's all these things that get labeled as internationalization that actually kind of creeps out beyond traditional internationalization. But it's really fascinating how you can use automation and systems to really make this super, small but mighty, that's how she described it, localization team that has all this power and all this impact on the organization.
I don't know why I'm thinking about like the effect of a droplet in a steady, pool of water, and it causes ripples. You get it right at the beginning. In motion point, we tend to call that in context translation, where a translator can actually see how that translation is going to render. Because if you're translating into German, there's a certain amount of word growth, right? There's probably a word in German for everything we just said in this conversation. And being able to manipulate the type of translation you would actually publish by understanding how it would render on a user interface is a massive benefit to what we first talked about, which is the customer experience. And you don't want to have like broken templates, units of measurements that are erroneous, currency exchange rates that are not making you as profitable as you should, or as showing the parity that every different market deserves to be shown from your product. So it's very interesting talking to you about this, because we're more on the website translation and localization side, but that is not as scalable or as effective if internationalization isn't properly set up at the beginning. And that was a great conversation. I have a bonus question for you, Adam.
Sure. Explain
to our viewers why I stands for internationalization.
Sure. That's first of all, that's like history in the 90s or something. L10N is also for localization, and then you have G11N, you have T9N. I mean, I'm happy to say I18N is a pretty common term. You can go on Google Analytics and see, like it's almost as much searches on I18N as there is internationalization, which is kind of interesting. It's just a bizarre fact I have to be aware of. So it's 18 letters in the middle, and at the end. So it's called a numeronym.
Numeronym. I actually did not know that that's actually a word.
Wow, there's a famous venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz, and I forget, but they actually borrowed that, and they call themselves the A, and I forgot the amount of letters it is in between, and Z. That's what they go by professionally. So they borrowed it from an I18N problem they had many years ago, which is kind of fun.
When I first started in the industry, I started seeing these hackers, and we have to use these hashtags, and I was like, but what is I18N? Like, why does that stand for internationalization?
What is this?
18 letters in the word internationalization between the I and the N. That's a lot of letters,
Well, when you have to write the word internationalization over and over again, you really start to appreciate I18N, It's almost like a finger twister. So Itunen is nice and easy. So that's funny. But
You
anyway,
said numerinim?
numerinim.
That's a new word. We need
Yeah.
to have a numerinim for the word number.
Yeah.
I'm messing myself up over there.
Globalization trivia. There you go.
Love it.
You know, maybe you'll win a contest at a bar with that. I doubt it.
Right.
Maybe at Loke World. No, Loke World should have a localization trivia.
That's true. We got to send it as a Jeopardy question too. I think that'd be a good
there
one,
you go.
Right? All right. Well, that does it for 3 questions with Motion Point. Adam, thank you so much for having for being here. And until next time, thank you very much. We'll see you again.